Hi, I'm Dr Ray Middleton. I'm the Workforce Development Lead at Fulfilling Lives, where we're working hard for a better response for people who have complex needs who face multiple disadvantage. By complex needs, we mean people with combinations of needs around their mental health, combined with alcohol or drug use, and homelessness or accommodation needs, and employment support needs, often combined with other needs. Unfortunately, in a pandemic, it's the poorest and most socially disadvantaged that fare the worst. I've been reflecting on the coronavirus outbreak and the different reactions I and the people around me are having to it, in our patterns of thinking, emotions, behaviour, and in our ways of relating with others. On my learning curve around this pandemic, I've thought it would help us all to have a trauma-informed approach to how we respond, both individually and collectively, to the coronavirus. So, in the hope of being helpful, I'm sharing some bite-sized, trauma-informed tips on how we respond well. In episode 1, I covered the first 3 tips. The first tip was to see the pandemic and our reactions to it through a trauma-informed lens, where we understand trauma as both the traumatic event and our varying reactions to that event. My second tip was to hold in mind that there's a diversity and difference in people's reactions to a traumatic threat, which likely connects to the context someone's in and the extent to which people's past experiences of trauma is being triggered by their current adversity. My third tip was to increase people's social resilience. Resilience is about processing trauma in a healthy way where it does not have lasting negative effects. It helps to think about resilience in a social way, as we're all part of someone's social network of resilience when we connect with them. Social resilience is connected to the number and quality of relationships within someone's social network. So improving the number and quality of someone's relationships within their positive social network increases their resilience to cope with and process life's adversities, including the impact of the coronavirus. Now, in this episode, I'm going to add to these tips by sharing tips 4 and 5. Tip number 4 is to look after ourselves, to self-care. It's vital to keep physically, emotionally and mentally healthy if we're going to maintain a caring role for any period of time during this coronavirus pandemic. We need to self-care and pace ourselves to avoid burnout. If we allow ourselves to become burnt out through self-neglect and overwork, then we're not going to be useful or helpful to others. People who care for themselves have been shown to be able to maintain a caring role for others in the long term. We can role model good practice in self-care to those around us. One way to self-care is by pressing the pause button and being reflective and self-aware of our emotional states, such as being tired, confused, annoyed, or anxious. During a pandemic, it's normal to experience feelings of fear, confusion, anxiety, or being overwhelmed at times, because this is an unfamiliar threat and we're trying to make sense of it, and human beings are relational, emotional, and ethical beings. We're not just rational beings, we're emotional. So being able to notice and name these feelings as we do our work, role models to others a self-reflective stance towards challenging life experiences. Being able to reflect and notice the emotional states we're in and our patterns of thinking can help us to respond better to the challenges ahead. We need some other people around us we can trust to listen with compassion. So it's important to think about self-care in a social way and not in an overly individualistic way. I do need to take responsibility for establishing good habits for looking after myself. But we are social beings and we need to accept care offered by other people. And if we're working or volunteering for an organisation, they have some responsibilities for caring for our well-being also. So self-care is a shared social process and a shared responsibility. So I need to accept some care from other people and I need to offer to care for colleagues and family as well. It's a two-way process. Nobody's just an endless caregiver. We've got limits to our resources and we need to receive support as well if we're going to support others. That's what community is. A trauma-informed approach seeks to increase people's self-care skills in order to reduce the direct negative lasting impact of the traumatic experience and reduce the indirect impact of witnessing other people's distress, trauma and adversity during the pandemic. Now, the coronavirus means everyone in the world, to varying degrees, is witnessing other people's distress, trauma and adversity. Witnessing distress could be face-to-face, such as when giving medical care, or over the phone, or witnessing it via the news reports and social media. So we're witnessing really difficult things happening and traumatic things happening as a result of the virus. This experience of witnessing other people's trauma is called secondary or vicarious trauma, and it can lead to compassion fatigue. Symptoms may include becoming emotionally numb and switching off, or very emotional, called hyperarousal. Patterns of negative thoughts might start to emerge, and you might notice that. You might notice a lack of compassion for other people as a reaction to witnessing all this trauma. You might feel increased anxiety or increased low mood or depression. These reactions to witnessing other people's trauma are understandable. If we ignore them, they can result in a poorer service being offered to the people that we're trying to help, as well as negatively affecting the mental and physical health of our own health and that of staff and volunteers. So it's important to notice the signs of secondary trauma. Secondary trauma can occur amongst a wide range of professional helping services and volunteers, such as mental health workers, substance misuse workers, housing support workers, community faith-based workers, and blue light responders. We can reduce the impact of secondary trauma through practices such as talking with someone we trust about how we're thinking and feeling as a reaction, on a one-to-one, or in a supportive group of peers or colleagues. So talking about how we're thinking and feeling as we go along tends to help. Some basic trauma-informed training is also likely to help, as it introduces some concepts, knowledge and skills around the impact of trauma, which might help us to make sense of things and ourselves and others. Self-care is about looking after our emotional, physical and mental well-being, and we can do this through establishing a balance of good new routines in our life, which include eating healthy meals regularly, drinking plenty of fluids but not too much caffeine, avoid developing unhealthy coping habits such as drinking too much alcohol, limit the amount of media, including social media, that you're consuming. So get some up-to-date information from reliable sources, but avoid constantly watching the news, as this tends to make people feel more anxious. Just choose a couple of times to get an update during the day, maybe. Whatever's right for you. Take some regular exercise. That's about self-care as well. Get enough sleep and rest. And connect socially with other people and talk about our thoughts and feelings about the virus in order to process and make sense of it and our reactions to it, and help other people too. But also talk about topics that are not the coronavirus, and remember to have some fun. Find meaningful activities to do, which might mean doing a new things like a new hobby if we have a period of self-isolation or are working from home. So the fourth trauma-informed coronavirus tip is to look after ourselves, to self-care, because it's vital to keep physically, mentally, socially and emotionally healthy by establishing new healthy habits and routines if we're going to maintain a caring role in the long run and avoid burnout. Next, we'll look at tip number 5, which is to apply 5 principles from trauma-informed care. The research into trauma found positive, healthy relationships are the most important factor helping people cope with and then recover from any traumatic experience. So good relationships will be central to coping with the coronavirus, the response to it, and its wider impacts on society. 5 principles have been found to be present in the kind of relationships that help people cope with and heal from trauma. These principles were used to form the basis of trauma-informed care. They are to act in relationships in ways that increase people's safety, empowerment, choice, collaboration, and trust or our trustworthiness. It also helps to ask ourselves, could I respond in a better way that increases one of these principles? Reflecting on and finding ways to increase these 5 principles can create a trauma-informed culture, which in turn can enable and encourage social resilience, healing and recovery. Trauma-informed care is an asset or strengths-based approach based on a reflective response to the impact that trauma has on people. It does this by prioritising the physical, psychological, relational and emotional safety. And in this approach, increasing safety is prioritised for both the person being offered help and the volunteers or staff offering support. Safety is not just for the people we're offering help to. One very practical way to increase safety is by helping someone without a home to access a home with a front door that locks. We can see this in the UK at the moment as local authorities are trying to find places for rough sleepers in hotels. Feeling safe is not only about physical safety, it's also about relational safety. A way to increase relational safety is by maintaining good, healthy boundaries in our relationships so the other person feels we are trustworthy, reliable and consistent in what we offer and the way we offer to help. However, we all need to learn about how to take reasonable and responsible risks in life, so it's important not to excessively take power away from people and try to control them when we're trying to increase their safety during this pandemic. We don't want to give people the message that we think they're not capable of making choices for themselves. Empowering people involves seeing them as people with capacities who have skills and can learn new skills. For example, empowering someone could involve helping and encouraging them towards trying some new habits and establishing some routines such as exercising daily or eating healthily, as well as helping someone access income to buy healthy food, which could be helping someone apply for benefits, for example. Increasing people's choices is another way to empower people, but this is currently being challenged as the public health measures reduces people's choices dramatically. Another trauma-informed principle is to work collaboratively with people. This means avoiding thinking that we're taking care of people who are dependent on what we have to offer, and instead seeing people as actively and collaboratively working at their own journey through life with some help from others. We strive for mutuality in a collaborative relationship where power is shared. At one unusual end of the spectrum, we're sometimes completely passively receiving care. For example, if we're unconscious in intensive care. But at any stage, moving away from that passive state, there's the opportunity to involve people collaboratively in the help we're offering them, so it becomes a mutual relationship of trust. As far as possible, we want to increase people's collaboration in the help we're offering. The ACEs studies, or adverse childhood experiences, showed us that often people with complex needs have more than the average amount of unresolved trauma in their past. This means those facing multiple disadvantage in our society will be disproportionately affected by this coronavirus, partly because the current adversity will trigger past unresolved traumas. The reason a trauma-informed approach creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment is because often the original trauma involved having relatively little power, or other people exercising power over them. So this can make people very sensitive to or triggered by authority figures who have or appear to have power over them. They may see us as an authority figure even if we do not see ourselves that way. Thus, surviving traumatic periods of our life and the subsequent journey of recovery often involves increasing someone's sense of power and control over their own choices in life. The fifth trauma-informed principle is building and then increasing trust through our relationships, which means increasing our trustworthiness. We can do this in simple ways by being reliable, not over-promising things we cannot really do, maintaining our boundaries, being honest, genuine, admitting mistakes and saying sorry when appropriate. People with past trauma have often had their trust in people broken, so it's healing to form a relationship with someone trustworthy And so this can help restore someone's ability to trust another human being. So the fifth trauma-informed coronavirus tip is to act in ways that increase people's safety, empowerment, choice, collaboration and trust. Remember, a trauma-informed approach encourages us all to press the pause button and reflect on the impact trauma has on ourselves and others, and say how we might respond better if we held this reality in mind. Sometimes called the 3 R's, as a way to remember this in our busy working days and nights. So recognise the impact of trauma, reflect and think, how could we respond better? So I would encourage us to pause and reflect on the 2 trauma-informed tips we've just covered. Tip number 4, remember, was to look after ourselves, self-care, because it's vital to keep physically, mentally, socially and emotionally healthy by establishing a new healthy habits and routines in order to maintain a caring role in the long run and avoid burnout. And tip number 5 was to act in ways that increase people's safety, empowerment, choice, collaboration and trust. I hope you found these films helpful. If you have, do share them with someone else through social media or of email, and do post a comment about what you think about these tips and how they might be helpful. Thank you, everybody.